The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Juby Headley, and I'm the Managing Director of the Municipal Waste Management Association. I'd like to thank you for joining our webinar today, which is entitled 5 Driver Behaviors That Might Contribute to Collisions and How to Address Them. Our featured presenter today is Rob Donahue, the Government Business Manager for DriveCam powered by Lytx, as in analytics. And that's one of the things that Rob will be sharing with you today. Rob's going to present a wealth of data that his company has collected on what contributes to driver collisions, specifically in the fleet management arena. And then he's going to also talk a little bit about how you can address those behaviors. I just want to start by thanking you again for joining the webinar and letting you know a little bit about MWMA, and then we'll jump right in. MWMA stands for the Municipal Waste Management Association, for those of you who may not know. We are a national organization affiliated with the U.S. Conference of Mayors, which represents solid waste, recycling, environmental, and sustainability professionals around the country, particularly at the executive level. What we try to do and what we hope this webinar will accomplish today are similar. Our vision and mission is to provide best practices and opportunities to share information and learn to help you guys do your job better. That's what we hope we're doing with today's webinar. After the webinar, you'll be getting an evaluation, and we hope you'll respond to that and let us know what you think. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Your lines are all muted. Rob will be sticking around for questions and answers following his presentation. So once we begin that session, I will, if you'd like to ask your question by telephone, ask you to unmute your line and you can pose a question directly to Rob. The other way that you can pose a question is by using the questions function, which should appear on your dashboard, your GoToWebinar dashboard. If you type a question in there, I'll be able to see it, and I can pose that question to Rob on your behalf, and we'll make sure it gets answered. So with that, let's just dive in. Rob, thanks so much for joining us here today. We're really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Juby. Greatly appreciate that. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us today. So quickly, we'd like to review the agenda for us here. Today, I'd like to discuss with you our findings on the top risky behaviors that contribute to accidents in your solid waste fleets. So in order to do that, I would actually like to provide a quick review of some of the commonly shared statistics that are out there, a quick introduction of how we go about collecting the data, and last, what the data actually shows us. And then I'll also share with you some of the best practices that I've seen take place from my 7+ years or so working with fleets across numerous industries, not only within the solid waste. So looking at some statistics here, these are from the National Highway and Traffic Safety Administration. This is something that I hope you are all familiar with or certainly have seen before. But at the end of the day, what this is telling us is that their accidents are all too common and that they're happening much too frequently on our roadways. But the really sobering fact for me is that 90% of those collisions are avoidable. And what they really come down to is those bad decisions that our drivers are making. So let's try to take a look at some of these. So if we're saying that 90% of those accidents are bad decisions by the driver, well, then is there a way to predict those drivers that are potentially going to make that bad decision? We here at Lytx feel that there is, because if they're making those bad decisions that cause the accident, they're most often making those bad decisions day in and day out before it actually leads to an accident. If I would ask you to guess what some of those bad decisions or bad behaviors might be that drivers are exhibiting, I'd be willing to guess that some of those that are listed here would come to top of mind. Distracted driving, going too fast or too fast for the conditions that are out there, aggressive driving, whether that's actually road rage or not, but certainly being overly aggressive behind the wheel, driver fatigue or fully falling asleep behind the wheel, and then violating various traffic laws out there. Now, I certainly see plenty of these when I get out there on the road and drive around, but are these behaviors, are they really leading to accidents? If we said that those accidents are happening every 5 seconds, how often are these events taking place prior to that? So that's what we often want to look at. So when looking at this safety foundation, what we're trying to identify here is leading indicators that are going to help us predict those lagging indicators, those accidents that you're looking at day in and day out. So this pyramid that you're looking at here is typically very popular in the risk management field. This is referred to as Heinrich's pyramid, and it was developed in the 1930s with a focus on industrial accidents. And the theory here is held up very well, as we're seeing some of the same data today when we look at risky driving behavior and actual vehicle accidents. So the theory goes that for every major accident, there are 29 minor events prior. So that major accident would be a fatality, a major injury, a totaled vehicle, that type of thing. And before that, you're seeing 29 minor fender benders, rear end collision, that type of thing. And these are probably what you're using today to determine who your poor drivers are, or who are those drivers that you need to focus the attention on. But if you look further at this theory here, what Heinrich said was that for each of those minor events that take place, there are actually 300 unreported or non-damaged risky behaviors that take place or exhibited before that. So what are we talking about when we're dealing with driving? Well, let's take a look at some examples. So what we just saw here is a real-life example of a driver driving, actually in this instance, a delivery vehicle, and they are exhibiting a risky behavior. In this instance, the driver is staring at his cell phone in his hand here. And his eyes are not on the road. There's a vehicle in front of him that is slowing and turning. And we see over the course of this video that a driver has plenty of time to actually react and to slow down. But because he's so engrossed in that phone in front of him and what's taking place there, he's missing that clear turn directional, the brake lights that are coming on, and it's not until the last seconds or so that the driver realizes it and jam on the brakes. Now, if any of you actually manage fleets or manage drivers out there, I am going to guess that it is rare that a driver will actually come back in after a day of driving and say to you, man, you wouldn't believe how close I came into slamming into the guy in front of me today as I was driving down the street paying attention to my cell phone. So how do you take those behaviors that are taking place throughout the day and identify them and get in front of them? And that's what we're referring to. Because if you don't, what you end up with is things like this. So let me play that for you again. Driver, blurred out here, but he's on the cell phone. Starts to go off the road, overcorrects, oversteers, and that is a solid waste truck that ends up on its side. And that's the major collision that's going to or potentially come about based on that driver exhibiting this risky behavior prior to this. So how do we do this? How do we capture our data? So you just saw an example of one of the videos that we capture. This is what we call a video event recorder that gets installed in the vehicle. It has dual lenses, one looking outside of the cab, as you saw there, one looking into the cab at the behavior of the driver themselves. It's actually continuously recording, but then it will actually erase any data that it collected unless there is a significant event that it captures. And what tells us to capture that is based on G-force data. So we have an accelerometer that measures G-force, and when a driver does a harsh brake, a rapid acceleration, swerves, or even hits a bump, that will trigger our device to record. And as you saw prior, it'll record 8 seconds before the incident took place and 4 seconds afterwards. And that gives us a window into what took place that caused that recorder to trigger, and we now get some insight into what's taking place behind the wheel. Now, one of the benefits to this is not only showing the risky behavior, but it also shows your drivers that are doing a great job. It'll also call out those drivers that someone is determined no matter what to get into the lane that they're currently occupying. And your driver's doing their job, driving diligently, paying attention, and might have to jam on the brakes to avoid an actual collision. So it gives you both the good and the bad. And we also limit it to 12 seconds so that we are giving our drivers some level of privacy. They are driving a corporate or a city or municipal asset, but at the same time, we do feel that drivers have a right to privacy, and the only time that we're actually capturing any video that's going to be viewed by anyone is when there is an event associated with that. Also on this device, we have the GPS capabilities to capture speed and location, because that's often pertinent to what's going on. And then there's cellular communication within that will actually send up the data that we collect so that we're able to see what's taking place throughout the day. So how does it work? Just briefly, we have that technology in the vehicle. We're actually capturing the data, setting it up over the wireless network. It comes to us where we'll do a physical review of each video. Those that are great behavior will identify it for our customers. Those that associate risky behavior will identify that behavior, push it down to supervisor, manager. They're able to talk to the driver and send them out to the road a little more knowledgeable and more aware of the behavior that they're exhibiting. What we also look at is what is causing that event to be triggered. So is it an acceleration, a brake, a bump, a corner? What was that? We're looking at what was the outcome. Were they involved in an accident? Was it close to an accident? Was that accident avoidable or unavoidable? Meaning that, hey, there was nothing they could do. They were paying attention, but somebody just came into their lane and hit them, whatever that might be. And then within all of that, it allows us to identify the root cause behaviors, not just the outcomes. So again, if we go back to that pyramid we were talking about, it's not just telling you about accidents and giving you video evidence. It's trying to get to the root cause of those behaviors that we believe are the leading indicators that are help you predict who's going to be involved in an accident later. So a little bit about the data set as far as these the analytics that I'm going to share with you in a little bit. So what we did is we took all of, 6 solid waste or sanitation fleets out there that represented over 2,800 drivers. And we looked at 2 years worth of data that provided us with 3.7 million erratic maneuvers. So G-force events that triggered our camera to capture what was taking place. Within that, we reviewed those videos that were generated by hard braking or cornering maneuvers, and we tried to identify the root cause behavior that caused them to corner that way or swerve or to brake. And then we also took a look at that to see if we cannot identify what is the predictor for the accidents that are most likely to take place moving forward. So what did the data tell us? Well, first we looked at when were these taking place, and we looked at it by month and by day. So one of the things that jumps out at me immediately is we see in these fall to winter months an increase. So starting in September, we start to see it increase up. October, November, December, we see kind of our highest rates out there. And then if we look at the day, we see that Mondays in particular are much higher than anything else that's out there. Obviously, the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, there's typically not a lot of solid waste pickup or limited pickup, certainly on Sundays, so we would expect to see lower numbers. But on a Monday, that should be just like any other day. A theory that we have here that's pretty popular regarding the fall and Mondays is something I refer to as the NFL theory. So if you think about it, that's typically when the NFL starts. You have Sunday night football games, and you have a lot to talk about come Monday morning. So not proven out yet, but certainly what I think is a strong theory, certainly for solid waste. Also, if we look at the time of day that these collisions are taking place, we see obviously in the morning time frame, that's 6 a.m. to 12 noon, we see the highest rate of accidents or collisions that take place here. Something that differs within the solid waste industry, if we compared to the data set, if we took it across all of the vehicles that we have out there, is our typical increases around that morning drive time in the PM commute. But in solid waste, you typically have an earlier start to the day and those vehicles getting off the road earlier than most. But it is peculiar to see that increase, in that morning and then maintain over the course of the morning period outside of the typical drive time for traffic and those types of conditions. So what are those 5 behaviors that we promised we'd share with you? Well, this is what we're looking at here. We see the hands-free cell phone distractions. We see following too closely. So following too closely to the vehicle in front of you. Myself, I've been driving for over 26 years. When I took driver's ed way back when, it was 1 second per 10 miles per hour. Now the kind of accepted rate is 3.5 second or greater buffer zone between yourself and the vehicle in front of you. There's still those drivers that drive right on the bumper in front of them, and those that exhibit a very close following distance of less than 1 second to increase their odds of being in a collision. Then have handheld self-distraction, running a red light, and not scanning an intersection. What I find interesting on this is if when I brought up those kind of first ones that you thought might be out there, we don't mention speed as a factor here. We don't mention road conditions as a factor here. What we're typically talking about here is conscientious decisions by drivers when they're driving out there. So the idea that they're going to have the cell phone in their hand or be hands-free, they're just making that decision on their own. Running a red light, that's something that oftentimes you're able to make that decision on your own, whether or not I'm going to stop for that light in front of me. The other 2 in here, they're not scanning the roadway and the following too closely. These are oftentimes subconscious, meaning that they're bad habits that we've picked up over time. So they should be following a little greater distance behind the vehicle in front of them. When they're entering an intersection, they should be looking left, right, make sure that the other vehicles are stopping, see if anyone's merging, that type of thing. Now let's look at what we're talking about here, where these drivers are X times more likely to be involved in a collision. So what our data shows us is that when you get behind the wheel of a vehicle and you drive, you have a 3 to 4% likelihood of being in an accident. So this tells us that you are increasing your chance of an accident by 2.5 times when you're using a hands-free cell phone device. That means that your likelihood of being involved in an accident goes from 4% up to 10%. So that's one of the riskiest behaviors that you can exhibit when you're driving a solid waste truck. Now this does differ from most of our fleets out there, especially with that hands-free cell phone in there. My personal opinion is that solid waste drivers are a little more conscientious about the image that it purveys when they are driving down the road with a cell phone to their ear. So they're more likely to be using that hands-free. We do also see that a lot of these accidents are caused when the driver is manipulating the phone. So they're driving, looking up a number or whatever it might be, even though they might be on hands-free. So what are the takeaways? What is it that we want to share with you here? By identifying those key behaviors, you can then go out focus your training and your messaging to prioritize those riskiest behaviors. Those behaviors that maybe you wouldn't associate with being the accidents, maybe that focus doesn't need to be on speeding, but it should be on that cell phone usage, following too closely. By looking at those top 5 behaviors that we found out there, you can have the greatest impact on preventing the accidents in the future. So if you're doing any type of training or messaging campaigns, we highly encourage you to use these as your focus points for how you can reduce the number of accidents that are taking place in your fleet. Talk a little bit about some successful campaigns or some best practices that I've seen over time. This was actually shared with me from the city of Kansas City, Missouri, where they actually went out and did a cell phone bag policy or lockbox. In their instance, they actually came up with a little different phone bag than this one here. They went with was a very bright orange bag that drivers pledged to use when they were driving. So when they get into the vehicle, they could actually take the cell phone out of their pocket, off their hip, whatever it might be, put it in the bag, zip it up, put it into the center console, whatever it might be, and get it out of their hand. Very successful campaign, very high visibility, and they feel it's had great impact on what they've seen out there. Others are monthly safety topics, so continuous kind of communication, emailing brochures, flyers, whatever it might be, reminding drivers about those basic or common core things that you're trying to share with them. Poster campaigns is an example of something that we've done with some of our customers, just reminding folks that, you know, your goal at the end of the day is to get that employee home in the same or better shape than we arrived there in the morning. And it takes a conscientious safety effort to do that. Driver training, this is an example of Smith Systems, which is a very popular one. There's plenty of other ones out there. Making sure that those drivers are aware of that, making sure that that's something that you continue to push, and that it's not something that they get the day that they're hired and never see again. Annual, quarterly, whatever it might be, refresher courses are always a great way to go. Driver recognition programs. This happens to be an example of one of our customers down in Tyler, Texas. They had some very successful results by recognizing drivers. This was an opportunity for those solid waste guys, the guys that are typically driving those trash trucks, to be recognized for the good behavior that they're exhibiting, the good representation that they're doing for the city itself out there. And in this instance, they were able to meet with the city manager, somebody that they're typically not going to interact with, and get a congratulations and a pat on the back. Safety ambassadors, it's another great idea. So have those people out there that are looking out for others. They can have kind of side talks. They can be leaders within that group, helping people to make sure that they're exhibiting those policy behaviors and safety behaviors that you're looking for. An internal ticketing campaign, we came across this in Irving, Texas, where their police department actually carries 2 citation booklets. One is the typical civil infraction for speeding and things like that, and the other is an internal. And if you are an employee of the city and the local police department sees you talking on a cell phone, let's say, they can actually pull you over and write you that internal citation, and then you as the driver need to show up at their monthly safety meeting and explain to that safety committee why you were exhibiting the behavior that you were. Very strong campaign, really kind of keeps people accountable, and one of the more clever and interesting ones that I've seen out there. And then the last is some type of a driver risk management solution. Something that allows you to gain insight into the actual behaviors that's being exhibited by your drivers, and then focus your training and your coaching on those behaviors, identifying those riskiest people within your fleet. The old 80-20 rule most likely applies. We see it all the time. 80% of your risk is coming from 20% of your drivers. You don't want to get rid of those drivers. You just want to work with those drivers to move that behavior out of their their driving habits, get them driving in a more safe and efficient manner. That's all I have, and more than happy to answer any questions you have.
Thanks so much, Rob. That was a pretty informative presentation you had there. Folks, we're now going to begin the question and answer period, and we have a good amount of time, less than the hour, to ask questions and get Rob to answer them. So please, whatever your question, feel free to submit it. We're strong believers here at MWMA, like our mamas told us, that there's no such thing as a stupid question. You have two ways of submitting your questions. One is to click on the raise hand function on your dashboard for GoToWebinar. The other is to type your question into the chat box and to send it to me, Juby Headley, the presenter, or the organizer, rather, of this webinar. So let's begin the question and answer section. Rob, the first question I want to pose to you is regarding driver safety policies. You've worked with a lot of municipalities around the country. In your experience, what's the role of the strength or lack thereof of the driver safety policies in helping to diminish these types of accidents that you've identified here today, or these types of bad driver behaviors?
Certainly. So policy is obviously important because you need to be able to do something once you identify a behavior that's out there. However, I have often find that policies are most often very ineffective. We love it when we go and speak to somebody that has a zero tolerance policy. The old, oh, you have to wear a seatbelt when you drive one of our vehicles or you lose your job. Our follow-up question is always, how many people did you fire last year? And when the response is zero, it leads to the question, well, is that an effective policy? Or do you really have people that aren't wearing their seatbelt? Because what we often see is if you've got 400 drivers out there, day one, we're going to show you 40 who aren't wearing their seatbelt. So the policy has to be measurable, and it has to be addressable so that you can actually go out there and enforce it, and that's what makes it a more effective policy. And personally, what we like to see as far as best practices are those kind of graduated policies within that. So, strike one, you get X, strike two, strike three, so on and so forth. Because oftentimes people just need a reminder and get them back on track.
So in other words, policies that aren't immediately highly punitive, policies that give people a chance for correction.
Correct. I mean, at the end of the day, you're not trying to get rid of people. You're trying to get them to act in a safe manner. So the old zero tolerance, again, I would argue that that doesn't mean you have no one that's driving unbelted. It means that you haven't caught anyone. So what you really want to do is you want to have policies that when you are able to identify infraction, you're able to appropriately address it, which would be training, which would be a warning. It would be maybe benching them, something like that, so that you're able to get them into alignment with that policy, which at the end of the day is you're trying to keep them safe.
Okay. I do have another question. This question has to do with what the distance should be between the driver and the vehicle in front of the driver. And I think you said 3.5 seconds. That's measured in time, not speed or miles per hour.
Correct. So,
Okay.
when I, again, way back when, you pick a fixed mark on the roadway. When the vehicle in front of you passes it, you count 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, and what you want to have, kind of the standard practice these days, is greater than 3.5 seconds is a safe traveling distance. And what we're seeing is those folks that are really tight, that are driving really close, you're seeing a tremendous increase in the likelihood of an accident.
Now, is 3.5 seconds something that the average driver can measure? Intuitively to me, and I'm following up on this question that was asked, intuitively to me, I can judge distance. I can see on my speedometer, I can see speed. 3.5 seconds, how do I know how to gauge that? Are you saying that's relatively easy to gauge?
It is, again, so, you're picking that fixed object, you're counting your head, counting out loud, whatever it might be, 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, 3 Mississippi. So, I see the vehicle in front of me and they go back by a speed limit sign. When does the front of my vehicle pass by that speed limit sign? And really it takes some practice, and what you see is that drivers that are used to leaving that buffer zone, they will tend to continue to do that. And we always find it interesting when we get customers coming to us saying, oh, well, you can't do that if you drive in Philadelphia, Baltimore, LA, insert your city name here. And what we find is that when we do have engaged clients that push that as a KPI, a key performance indicator for their fleet when they're trying to do that type of thing, they can often achieve that KPI, yet, miraculously, they don't add time to their workday. It's similar to speeding. I've got to go 60 rather than 55. Do you really get there that much earlier? Not at all. So by leaving that safer zone, you're limiting the risk to be involved in a rear-end collision, and you're still be able to get your job done.
Okay. So kind of to phrase that another way, leaving that safe distance isn't, in your experience or in your research, adding any appreciable amount of time to your ability to complete a route in a allotted amount of time.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay.
And what we often see, it's interesting, by having the power of video, you're able to see the behaviors that are exhibited. So, we often get that, that driver that likes to quiz us. Well, so do you expect every time a vehicle pulls in front of me, I jam on the brakes and get a 3.5-second following distance? No, that's not the case. What we see is, within that, driver gets, vehicle cuts in front of you, moves in front of you, whatever it might be, you simply ease off the accelerator until you get a safe distance between yourself and that vehicle in front of you, and you continue on. And it can be done, and it is realistic.
Okay. I have another question that's come in. One of the things you didn't mention, and maybe you mentioned it and we didn't hear it, but we talked about these 5 behaviors, driver behaviors that can contribute to collisions. No word that I heard was speeding. I think intuitively for a lot of us, again, and I'll use the word intuitively a lot, but I think speeding is something people expect to see be one of the key factors, and is something you think of as a driver behavior. Are these factors that you presented far more likely to cause accidents, or just far more common occurrences in accident or risky behavior situations than speeding?
So, correct question, and that was, if you remember, I kind of posed, what do you think they're going to be? And number 2 was speed or speed for the conditions. And certainly, there's 2 things that we really look at when we're talking about accidents out there. We're looking at frequency and we're looking at severity. And when we're talking about frequency of accidents, what we're seeing is, in a solid waste fleet, these are the 5 main contributors. And they're not by a gigantic long shot, but a predominance. These are the 5 behaviors that really stand out when we look at those, X million incidents that took place out there. When you do have somebody that is going at a high rate of speed, when they do get involved in an accident, obviously it's going to increase the severity that's related with that accident out there. So it is something that you want to be in front of and conscientious of, et cetera. But often what we're looking at, too, if you think about the solid waste, is most of the miles that those vehicles are driving are being done at a low rate of speed. So especially when you're talking about residential pickup, that type of thing, often you're less than 15 miles per hour. So speed isn't a huge one. Now, anecdotally, one thing that we have seen, we talked about, running red lights or stop signs infractions. That's usually a close follower behind that, and that really comes down to policy. And what we have seen is that solid waste fleets or sanitation fleets that have a policy that says when you're done with your route, you can go home, we typically see one of the highest infractions with that is rolling stop signs.
Interesting. Interesting.
So in an effort to get that route done sooner, I'm making stop signs optional.
That almost implies that that policy might not be one that municipalities might want to institute. And I think that's a good lead into another question we've received. The question has to do with the driver recognition program you mentioned. But I'm going to take the liberty of expanding it a little bit. In terms of incentive programs broadly, you talked a little bit about some incentive programs that some cities have implemented. What do you see works? And the specific question that was asked is, what kind of time frame do you think, or in your experience, have you found is effective? Do you reward folks or recognize them monthly, quarterly, yearly? What kind of time frame do you think works?
Sure. So, like anything, the more often you reward behavior, the better it is. I have a 3-year-old. I live that every day, right? But what we've found is any type of recognition works, especially in municipal fleets. It's often difficult to do any type of monetary rewarding or things like that. I mean, even if it's a token appreciation of a $5 or $10 gift card to the coffee shop, that type of thing often helps. What you're really dealing with here, though, is when you have the ability to identify the truly safe drivers, it goes a long way, because a lot of folks will do some type of a safety bonus or safety recognition, and they're doing it based on accidents. But as we talked about before, when we're dealing with leading versus lagging indicators, I could be on the edge of getting an accident every time I get on behind the wheel. However, I've been lucky to date. So are you rewarding the good, or are you rewarding the lucky? And by having insight into what's actually taking place behind the wheel, those everyday behaviors, it allows you to truly identify it. Because often what happens is you do this reward program, you might recognize one driver, and all the other drivers behind their breath are chuckling because they know that he's the most dangerous guy out there. He's just been lucky today. So anything that can get in front of those drivers that gives you true insight is going to help, and then recognizing those drivers. And what we see is we've done some quarterly stuff. We've done some biannually, annually. Again, anything that gets out in front. What we like to do, especially early in the program, is do it more frequent, because that allows you to see what the growth is. So we've seen one customer where they had, over the course of 120 days, they had 7 drivers within their solid waste division that didn't have any risky maneuvers, meaning that their camera might have been triggered, but they jammed on the brakes because somebody cut them off or something like that. So they were never doing something unsafe or risky behind the wheel. We came back 3 months later and looked at the same data, and suddenly they had 17 people that were in that group over the past 3 months, because their peers see them getting recognized. And their peers see that they get to meet the city manager, or they get a T-shirt that says, "I'm a safe driver," or whatever it might be. And there becomes some healthy competition amongst drivers.
Excellent. Excellent. We have a question about training. And the question is worded, how can you tell between a training course and real-time driving when training new hire drivers? Does that question make sense?
So
okay.
it does. So I think what you're referring to is kind of monitor driving or co-driving, that type of thing, ride along, whatever the terminology might be. And that's, again, where technology like ours, we often see some interesting results. So our technology is right in front of the driver, so it's there in their face. It's on the windshield. And what we'll see is for the first 7 to 14 days, boy, you've got a bunch of great drivers out there. And it's called the Hawthorne effect, where that's right there. It's immediate. They're able to see what's going on, and they're exhibiting their best behavior. But then human nature kicks in, and they start to forget about it, and they start to get into their bad habits. So one of the most difficult things about ride-alongs is you're not truly getting insight into how that driver drives every day. What you're really getting is insight into how that driver drives when you're sitting next to him. So they are good. They're needed. A lot of times what I think those are most useful for is to introduce them to the technology. This is how our sidearm works. This is how we dump. This is the route that we go. Go in this gate to the transfer station. Don't go in this one. Those are very good and very useful for that. But oftentimes you want to be able to make sure that you're getting real-time and continuous feedback on how those drivers are driving the vehicles, and you need something that gives you that insight. to really get to the true guts of the situation.
Okay. Folks, let me stop for a moment at this point and just remind you, if you have additional questions, and thanks for those of you who have submitted them already, you can either send them to me through the chat function on your GoToWebinar dashboard. There is also an opportunity to click on the raise hand icon, in which case I can call on you and have you ask your question directly, if you so choose. So far, Rob, we've been getting most of the questions through chat. There's a question about safety programs in general, and it's mostly, do you have any advice for key aspects of a safety program? Is there anything that in your experience safety programs lacking this don't work, or best practices where you know that this is a great type of safety program?
So I really can't comment to that. I'd be lying if I said I was an expert in that side. But one thing that I have seen no matter what, is consistency, and also kind of top-level buy-in. And what I mean by that is the locations that we go and we visit, we can often tell how successful a program ours is going to be from the first day that we show up. And what I mean by that is those folks that have a culture of safety, and that usually starts at the top and trickles down, we see those places where you pull in and all of the private vehicles are backed into the parking spot because they ask drivers to do that during the day, and that trickles over to doing it in their off hours or in their private vehicle. We walk inside and there's a poster hanging on the wall reminding people that safety doesn't take accidents, or some type of a message. There's a countdown on the wall that says accident-free for X number of days, right? That is a culture of safety. That is something that they take safety serious, and it's not just a reactive place where, hey, we had something bad take place, what are we going to do to fix that? Instead, it's something that day in, day out they're pushing for. So I can't say whether I've seen one better than the other, but we always see is that consistency and that top-down. It starts with the director, the mayor, the city council, whoever it might be, all the way down to the end driver where they take it seriously.
Yeah. I was wondering if we could circle back around when we talk about aspects of safety programs. You mentioned a program in one municipality where there's sort of an internal ticketing program. I was wondering if you could sort of talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting. So we were actually invited to their safety committee. I believe it meets monthly, as I recall. And they were talking about different things that were taking place throughout the municipality. So, if somebody's running a saw and they cut their finger, they bring them in, and not to chastise that employee, but instead learn from that. Hey, was it a faulty equipment? Is there something that we could do to change what's going on there? What took place? Can we get you some type of a guard, different equipment, whatever it might be? And this just kind of falls into it where, again, it's a culture of safety that is driven throughout the community where they take things seriously. So they have a policy that says you can't be speaking on your cell phone while you're driving a city vehicle. They have a policy that says that you should be wearing a seatbelt at all times when you're operating a city vehicle. And again, it goes back to the ability to measure and to take action on those where they have people out there looking at it and holding others accountable for that. And it's really a cultural piece throughout that. And I think that it helps, when you actually get people together to discuss what can go on, where you should focus attention. And a lot of times, maybe they don't have to spend dollars on new equipment, but maybe they need to communicate about something that's taking place. And it's as easy as that can prevent the next accident.
Wonderful. Well, folks, we're nearing the end of our time together. So again, if you have any questions, get them in. As the beginning of a wrap-up question, Rob, are there any sort of gems of wisdom, or if there's one piece of advice you could give folks who are trying to minimize risky driver behaviors in their departments, is there one thing you would say to them, or 2 or 3 things?
The biggest thing that I'd say is get your head out of the sand. If you didn't have an accident last year, it's not because you have great drivers. What you need to be doing is you need to be paying attention to what is going on out there. Do you have trends that are taking place? Do you have people that keep coming in with dents in the bumper? Oh, well, I don't know what happened there. Was that mysterious pole that moved, whatever it might be. It's pay attention to what's going on. Look for those trends. Try to get in front of it, and try to put those training, education, awareness, whatever they might be, campaigns around it, as well as policy, and hold people accountable for that. Again, there's some basics of driver safety that I'm always amazed that folks don't have it in place. The idea of first movement forward. When that vehicle, when you park it, the first thing you should be doing is putting it in drive, right? Minimize the number of times you have to put it in reverse, whether that's pulling through or whether that's backing into a spot. Things like that, they go a long way. But not only putting that in place, but then helping people to adhere to those policies.
Great. We have a question from Troy Robin. Troy, you can unmute your line by pressing *6. If you'd like to unmute your line and ask your question, that would be great. Well, maybe I can unmute it. Troy, can you hear us? Well, I don't know what happened to Troy. Troy was asking a follow-up question. He asked the original question, actually, about the difference between training courses and real-time street driving. It seems that his question had to do more with the difference between the feel of the course and training, if I don't understand correctly. And Troy, if you can hear me and you want to unmute your line, again, you can press *6. I've been talking with him in chat, so I'm not sure. Troy? Can you hear Troy, Rob? Is it just me?
I'm not hearing him now.
Oh, okay. Well, this is a good point to ask the question, Rob. If folks have follow-up questions for you, I can certainly pass them on to you. But are you okay if folks email you or contact you directly with any follow-up questions they might have?
More than happy for them to contact me directly.
Okay. Asking your permission, Rob, when I send out my follow-up thank you email, I would like, if you don't mind, to include your email address in it just to facilitate the process of folks who might want to contact you. Are you okay with that?
That would be fantastic, and I'm happy to address any questions anyone has.
Great, great. Well, that appears to be all the questions we've got coming in now. Let me say to everyone, thanks for your time today. Thank you so much for joining our webinar. As is always the goal of the Municipal Waste Management Association, we hope that what we do is provide you with information and tools and strategies that help you do your job better. And we want to make sure that we're able to do that effectively. So after this, we'll be sending out an evaluation within the next 24 hours, and we hope you'll take the time to complete it and give us your best feedback on what you thought of the webinar, how we can improve our webinars in the future, and topics and issues you might be interested in seeing us present webinars on. So on behalf of MWMA, let me thank our presenter today, Rob Donahue, for his time and his talent in giving this presentation. And again, thank all of you for attending. We hope you'll participate in more events. Let me let you know briefly before leaving. We do webinars roughly quarterly. Our next one will be in May or June. We're always looking for topics, so if you have any ideas, please feel free to forward them to us. And you'll also be getting information about our annual conference. We do a fall summit every year. This year it's going to be from October 15th through the 17th in San Diego, California. So thanks again, and we'll be talking to you soon. Take care, everyone, and thanks again. I'm Rob. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, take care.